as we continue to trek through this world of unknown, it's created this little fun thing we all do, which is play the hypothetical. And that's the hypothetical of what should and should not happen in sports, notably, and maybe even the hypothetical of how to fix the past. But this conversation here in the midst of our world of unknown has ventured over to college football, has ventured over to what's going to happen with this upcoming season, and if there's even going to be an upcoming season, and how it will look, if at all. And that started a conversation between a colleague of mine this past week over there at WVU West Virginia Twitter, in which a comment was made, and some may think it's ridiculous, some may not, in terms of, well, these seasons are going to probably have asterisks over them anyway. No one's going to legitimize any conference championship, any national championship. No one's going to think anything's legit anyway. So instead of doing that, let's just all these teams kind of revert back to the past prior to conference realignment recently and just simply play a schedule of natural rivals regardless of conference, regardless of how good these teams are. And let's just do it that way almost for 12 weeks of fun this year. And while that could be cool to almost have a year of exhibition, that then ventured over into the other end of that conversation, most notably surrounding WVU and what they should do with their schedule permanently moving forward in terms of one of their natural rivals, at least in their state, probably the only one they have in their state. In fact, it is Marshall. So that got me an idea here as I try to throw some content up at the wall and on Pittsburgh Sports Live in the midst of a no sports universe. Why don't I talk about whether or not that actually makes some sense? And it seemed like one of my colleagues actually was mostly disagreeing with me, so I figured, why don't we do this together? So for this edition here of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now, I'm your host, Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined with Randy Gyorko, who is affectionately known as Goose on the Metro News Sports line that I sometimes contribute to. And he also, you may be aware of his last name, not that he's not known for other things, but he also is the brother of Major League Baseball player and former Mountaineer great who I had the pleasure of calling his games back at the old Holly Field in Jedd Gyorko. So it's Randy Gyorko joining me as I enjoy the finally nice weather here in my back porch. So Randy, thanks for giving me the time. How you been?
I've been good, man. Like you said, it's finally nice here today too. I think I'm going to go golfing this afternoon, maybe get outside and enjoy some of what Governor Jim Justice has allowed us to do, keep my distance. Yeah. But, that's the one sport where you can actually do that. So
right.
Yeah, I'm good. And who would thought that with all this going on, we should be in the middle of NHL playoffs. We should be in the middle of the NBA playoffs. We should be coming up, College World Series. Baseball should be getting ready towards the summer. Everything should be happening, and all of a sudden we started talking about college football scheduling.
Yeah, not that I guess people don't.
Game that West Virginia hasn't played in forever, and I was just excited to see that come across my timeline because I don't know how many Rex Chapman videos I can watch, and he's doing good stuff there, but it seems to be all that's on the timeline. So we needed something to talk about, and what better to talk about than West Virginia playing someone that their fans seem to not want to play.
Yeah, he throws the shots there early on. Yeah, and it is a bit of a weird world right now, certainly in the sports world, and I've touched on that on past shows. But the NFL draft's now over because that surrounded tons of my schedule. I really wasn't. People were talking about, I'm binge watching all these shows. I'm doing nothing. I'm like, I'm actually busier. The NFL is keeping it moving. So I certainly wasn't living the lax life while under quarantine. But I got on the golf course last weekend. You guys were able to have a little bit more fun on the golf course for a little longer than me. It literally opened up last weekend in Pennsylvania, and I went out there. But for breaking news, I do suck all over again. So that's unfortunate. But I got to keep getting out there. But this is a different universe. Now the NFL draft's not there. Major League Baseball season may or may not happen. There's different proposals there. Waiting for the playoffs, even all these other events that maybe aren't major, like the College World Series, a lot's not going on. So it does bring up these conversations. And this one is one of those conversations because every now and then on Twitter, you do see random fun between Pitt and WVU in terms of WVU Twitter. You randomly see backyard brawl conversations. And it does seem like both sides there, maybe because they're similar schools, similar spots maybe in their respective conference, seemingly both want to play that game. There's a contingent of talking about the past and the good old days of Pat White and ranking players, and we got into that as well. But this has been a conversation that really hasn't come up in a while, regardless of quarantine. And it did come up, and I will say, because that's not really what we're going to get into here. We're going to get into if this was a reality, whether they should play. But I wouldn't mind it for this year. I'll segue, because this year is not really – no one's going to count this. No matter what goes on, someone's going to complain and say there's an asterisk here. But it did bring up the conversation of WVU Marshall, and they obviously have history in terms of two schools in the state, but they hadn't played for 100 years. Then they played again. They had that competitive game. West Virginia always winning those games. We know the story with Randy Moss and legendary receiver that he is. He ended up going to Marshall, claiming that WVU didn't want him, and that whole scandal that went on there, and how he played so well in that game but didn't win. But it's never really been a conversation that seemingly has been legitimized to have an actual series or to play consistently. And I was on the other side of the fence here, because this actually even kind of is similar to some conversations that have gone on. News broke the other day in terms of Pitt and basketball doesn't want to play Duquesne anymore. A lot of these conversations are kind of similar. But for me, I feel like WVU would be putting themselves on the line way more than, say, Marshall. And this maybe also separates between in-state fans who are from West Virginia and, say, out-of-state fans from Pittsburgh or from other parts of the world that have the WVU degree. Say maybe that's the difference between the two of us. But it would be a lot that WVU would be putting on the line. Marshall would not be putting that on the line. If Marshall won, it basically would be like their Super Bowl, even if they didn't have any wins in that given year. And we know they would treat it that way. And West Virginia would have their entire season dashed if they didn't get a win. So they have a lot larger of a risk in playing that game. What do you say to that part of the conversation, that devil's advocate stance, I guess, against what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess I don't care. Like, not to be flippant, but
right.
Yeah, of course West Virginia has more on the line. We are a bigger program than Marshall. However, just go down and beat them. So what? You're
right.
playing Towson. You're playing Eastern Kentucky. You're playing LIU. You're playing James Madison. Somebody told me that James Madison was on the same level of Marshall, and that person needs to figure out a little bit of history about college football. James Madison in 2020 is where Marshall was in 1993, 99.
Yeah.
So they're not at a different level. Marshall's a better program. They just are. They're FBS. Well, I still want to call it Division One.
Right. Although that was a game that WVU has had close calls against those schools, including JMU, and that would have been.
And they've never lost one. And they've never lost one, and they haven't lost to Marshall. So just go down there, beat them, so that you don't have to listen to them complain. I guess I just don't understand the risk factor, or like the what if West Virginia loses? Who cares? West Virginia lost to their biggest rival for a chance to play for the national championship, and life went on, and life continued, and it still gets brought up every now and then. But you know what? Everyone can look back and be like, man, that was really terrible. But it wasn't the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the football program. They're in the Big 12. They're still nationally ranked on a pretty consistent basis.
Right.
So it's a non-conference game, and with the playoff even more, I think, why not schedule them? And it would suck to lose to them. I mean, let's be honest. No one's sitting here saying like that would be great. It would sting for a little bit, and they would chirp, but they would be put back in their place pretty quickly if this.
Do you think so? Because I think that's the difference with Pitt, where as much as they brag about that game, they do have somewhat of an understanding at this point that if they held ceremonies and gave rings, it'd be embarrassing for them because they're a major college program. I feel like if Marshall wins that game, because in all reality, the way the system is right now, and they're talking about expanding, but even if they would get to that point, a program like Marshall, which we've seen evident with UCF, and I've been in that conversation that they did not deserve their share of the national title. They didn't play a hard enough schedule to get there. So basically, in all reality, Marshall's in a 0% chance of ever being a national champion. They're basically playing for their conference, and that's it. And whether that sucks or not, that's just the case. So if Marshall would beat West Virginia, they're going to treat it as way more than Pitt even treated 13-9. I mean, they probably will legitimately have ceremonies for decades, even if the WVU would go ahead and win their conference somehow that year, because obviously it would be an out-of-conference game. that would be the difference for me. I mean, and I also feel like there's a split in terms of every WVU fan feels like Pitt's a rival. Every WVU fan of at least a certain age feels like Virginia Tech's a rival, and even Miami's a rival of older than that. I don't feel like it's a universal agreed upon opinion that every WVU fan feels Marshall's a rival. Like I personally don't care what Marshall does. If they go undefeated.
They're not on West Virginia's level.
Right.
That's how I define rival. At some point, like West Virginia, for the longest time, like I don't even know if you can really consider West Virginia and Penn State rivals.
Not anymore.
The series was so lopsided. Even when they were playing, they were only rivals because of proximity and the fact that they played annually.
Yeah.
Other than that,
now maybe if they start playing more often, that could refuel that rivalry because they're in major conferences. Whereas
that's right.
I don't know if WVU and Marshall continue to start playing consistently.
No, I don't even know what conference Marshall's
WVU
in.
fan would hate Marshall.
Are they in Conference USA or? I don't even know what conference they're in. I mean,
they're not in a major conference.
It changes all the time, so they're not really rivals. I guess I just don't. It just wouldn't bother me. I see a lot of people being like, it would ruin everything that West Virginia's built, and you can never say you lost him, and it would ruin your season. And there were a lot of people in my mentions that I put out a tweet that said, I think a lot of people would rather go 6-6 and beat Marshall than go 11-1 and have the one loss beat a Marshall and play for the Big 12 championship. And man, I am not on board with that.
That's interesting. I'm not saying I would go in that direction, but I will say that if
you live in Huntington, maybe.
Yeah.
But I live in Morgantown, and we don't really care about Marshall. So just go down, play them so that they'll stop chirping, beat them, come back, and move on with your schedule.
The only problem is, though, and I would never go that far, but if they'd have an 11-1 year and have that one loss beat a Marshall, I don't know if that would be the situation because of the rankings, but that would suck if Marshall basically does what Pitt did and single-handedly cost WVU a chance at the playoff.
It could.
That would be almost the same. And Marshall, they're not stupid. They understand they can't be national champions. So that would really almost, if you're going to lose to Marshall, you'd rather it be in a 7-5 year where it can be forgotten. Rather have it mean something either way. And I guess my thing is, which is the difference of, say, because I know we brought up and you talked about Ohio State does play Ohio, even though they're an elite program and Ohio's not, in different comparisons there with the Florida schools. I guess I'm pessimistic enough and been a fan long enough to realize that WVU's going to, if they would play a home-and-home series, if they would play for 3 years, then they would re-sign the contract because the governor wants them to. You play that out for 9-10 years, they're going to lose a game. I almost would bet my life on it. WVU's going to eventually lose.
Yeah, so what? It's sports. If you're afraid of losing a game to somebody, then sports isn't for you.
No, but
isn't.
That's true. But unfortunately, the way the competitive balance is in college football is it almost doesn't allow it to be as much of a competition. I want to beat you. I want to play the best. I mean, if you and I were on the golf course, I want to beat you if you're good. But the problem is that when you have an out-of-conference schedule, you can schedule so many few teams. And if playing a team it has to do something for you as well as potentially could hurt you. There's a semblance of you don't want to – it's almost a mixed bag. You don't want to have the schedule be too incredibly tough out of conference where you're playing Florida State when they're good, or you're playing Alabama or even Virginia Tech when they're good, which is what they've done. You want to play a team that's good enough that's going to mean something for you if you win. But if you lose, it's not going to be the end of the world. You want to get that middle-of-the-road game. That's almost the ideal situation right now out of conference with the situation with the playoff, almost like the Tennessee or Virginia Techs of the world right now. Marshall would be the situation where if you lose, the world's over, and if you win, it's going to do nothing. And then you're going to have people that are potentially, even if you run the table and have that Marshall win, and you don't have a legit out-of-conference victory outside, even with the Oklahoma games in there. Say you go through the schedule, you lose to Oklahoma like every other year, and then you don't have any other major win because Texas is down, Marshall's in your out-of-conference, Pitt's in your out-of-conference. You do this unique rivalry, local rivalry schedule, you're going to literally end up as the fifth-ranked team in a 4-team playoff because they're going to say that you only have one quality win or you don't have any quality wins.
So that's out of your control. And Marshall's better than the worst team that's going to be on West Virginia's schedule for the foreseeable future. They fit that bill that you were just talking about, the team that Now, Marshall's not going to move the needle in a positive direction. You're right. But they also, if West Virginia played 12 games and didn't play an FCS team
Right.
and had 11 Power 5, which is what West Virginia has done. They have 3 non-conference games. They play 2 Power 5s, and then they play another win, right? One that you can put a W on the schedule that's a home game. That's the biggest issue, the home game. Right. This is where I agree with you. Marshall can't demand a home and home or even a 2-for-1. They're not. Right. They shouldn't be able to do that. I have no problems going down there every now and then if the series is played on a consistent basis, and I don't even want it to be an annual thing. It shouldn't be.
Okay.
I would much rather play Pitt. I would much rather play Virginia Tech. I'd rather play Maryland. I'd rather play any of those schools that are at a different level all the time. I have more hate in my heart for those schools because I've been to those places. My brother played against them.
Right.
I traveled to those games. I know those people. I just don't have a problem playing Marshall every now and then. And I wouldn't mind going down there once every 5 games.
Yeah. So, now, is that a thing that you also know some of those fans, you know, that school a little bit? Is that a thing you think they would agree to? Because
no.
I've heard that brought up, and that when that was brought up years ago, they basically were proposing a home and home, which is that
ridiculous.
I think is insulting to WVU. They are a major program with major bowl victories and top 15 in wins in the history of the sport. It's not the case for Marshall. So, yeah, that's something that would need to be pushed. My concern is, because of the current leadership over WVU, that if there was ever a conversation of playing the game, reasons for playing it would be almost a charity service for the School of Marshall because they're in state and would help them money-wise, and then they would get the response, well, if you really want to help us money-wise, you got to come here. So they would agree to do it. So I'd rather not play at all if WVU has to go there, because if WVU loses in Huntington, that's even worse than playing the game. I mean, I
don't go to Huntington anyway. That wouldn't bother me. I don't care. I'm not.
Okay, you wouldn't go down there?
No, I don't know. I've been to Huntington like twice in my life.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever been to Virginia
my entire life. I went there once for work, and I think I drove through once on the way to Cincinnati or something. But yeah, we shouldn't go down there on a consistent basis. I just wouldn't have a problem making a trip like West Virginia did. Almost lost that game. Should have lost that game. Marshall absolutely gassed that game a million ways. But it wouldn't bother me. But yeah, we do agree with that. I don't know. The problem that I had the biggest issue with was the people saying there's the risk reward. There's always risk when you play a competitive sporting event. There's always going to be risk. And the reward is, and especially in college football, a win. You play 12 games. Chalk as many W's up in that win column as possible and let the chips fall where they are, especially with the playoff. If this were the BCS, I would be totally willing to listen to the strength of schedule thing. But 1 out of 12 games against another Division 1A team, if you run the tape, is not going to make or break. If a team in the Pac-12 plays 12 and they're good and everybody has one undefeated and they look at you and they say, well, you played Marshall, but you also played Pitt and you also played Maryland, or you played Florida State and you played Virginia Tech, I can't imagine that they're going to sit there and say, well, you know, that Marshall game when, you know, you played them and you beat them 38-13. That's the one that's going to keep you out.
Yeah, as long as that's the case, I guess, though. It's the risk-reward thing still just isn't there for me. But I also think a lot of this, and you bring up the BCS, a lot of this may hinge on, as much as we understand it more now, no one's, unless you're in the room, ever to really be able to say definitively how these teams are ranked. And it does appear strength of schedule is involved, even though they say it's not. So that's the thing. Like, it almost appears like once they get the teams that they feel like they're grouping between the first 8, and maybe it'll be different now if they do expand, that they then are kind of ranking it off of strength of schedule, which I'm not even saying they shouldn't do, because at some point that has to be involved.
You have to differentiate teams somehow. If you don't play each other and you don't have a head-to-head, or you don't have a common opponent on the schedule, then you have to look at, okay, who you played, where'd you play them, and what happened. So that's human nature. There's zero reason that I would never believe someone that said they don't look at strength of schedule when they try to determine who's the 4th team and who's the 5th team in a playoff. Because if they say that, I think they're lying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, pretty much. Now, you are on the other end of things. You are for the Pitt game, the Virginia Tech
Yes.
game. Obviously, there's only so many of those games. So if you had to rank order of importance, order of how you'd want, if you're going to schedule it, because you only can get so many in, which I know is the conversation of maybe
Yes.
Marshall can't be every year. Maybe that have to be every now and then, which I do think that's probably something they're never going to agree to if you play them once every 3 years, some weird contract. But if you had to rank it in terms of out of conference schedule, would you going to give you a multiple choice here? Pitt, Virginia Tech, Penn State, Marshall, and then another game that is
Maryland.
Well, even Maryland. Then what I'll do is then Maryland, and then another game if you had to throw in that's just totally off the wall. If you do want to play the Alabamas of the world,
Sure,
or every 5 years, those type of elite competition games, which as cool as they are, I'm less in favor of those games with the current system. But how would you rank in terms of what you want?
Well, before December 1st, 2007, it would have been Virginia Tech would be number one on the list. I still hate them more than anyone. But that's personal. That's personal preference.
Okay.
It was at the height of the Rich Rod, Frank Beamer, Michael Vick, Marcus Vick, Pat White, my brother. You know, the Wednesday night game down there with Grant Wiley and Brian King.
Right.
You know, the year after that when they came here and the pepper sprays. It's just Virginia Tech overtook Pitt as the biggest rival for anybody that had WVU ties during that stretch. I'm 38, so if you're probably 35 to 41, it's Virginia Tech.
See, I'm a little bit younger than that.
After that, I mean, after the one game, well, you have to remember West Virginia was beating Pitt pretty consistently for a good while.
Yeah.
So it kind of had that Penn State WVU feel for a younger crowd, or my crowd, because it was like, oh, you know, Pitt's big and it's fun to go up there because it's an hour away. But we beat them, and, you know, Walt Harris and Dave Wannstedt. But then that game changed. So Pitt's number one for me. One, because of it being close. It's a fun game to go to. I like being in Pittsburgh. I like the city. I think it's fun to go to games up there. I like when they come down here. Virginia Tech's got a more fervent fan base. So that's a more fun game to be in the stadium for, because they hate us. We hate them. Pitt doesn't have a ton of fans. They've got diehard fans, and they've got a lot of people that really like Pitt going back. But let's be honest. If Penn State or Notre Dame or West Virginia is not coming there, they're not selling out Heinz.
Yeah, it's hard for a Pitt fan to even argue it. Yeah.
But so those are number one and number two, and like locks. I like Maryland. I would like to play Penn State. I think it'd be fun, but like you said, it's been so long. When was the last time?
My only thing about the Penn State game is there's a chance that you could play the Penn State game and use the Penn State game as an elite competition game, because that would be a risk reward.
It could be your neutral site, your Chick-fil-A kickoff game, where you could play them in Philadelphia. You could play them in D.C. like West Virginia did Virginia Tech, and have it take that place. So
that almost would be not to say that WVU's, you know, not to insult the program, but this is just keeping it real. They're a lesser program than Penn State. So if WVU would win that game, that would be a game that could really elevate the program. Where if they lose that game, I think most people are going to say, well, Penn State's usually a top 5 team. They're supposed to win it anyway. And as long as you keep it close and we're not embarrassed, that's cool. So that could be a game that you could interchange in there, and can also be a natural rival. So I do actually like the Penn State game, even though maybe there's not as much hatred.
I agree. And we'll agree again, because I do agree with the neutral site games. I agree with what you said. They're cool. There's just something about college football big games that need to be played on campus, in my opinion. Maybe because I'm old and I have kids and I'm not traveling to Atlanta and I'm not going to Charlotte for those games. And those are fun for people to go. I have friends that have gone to them, and they say it's a really good time. It's the bowl game atmosphere, like it was when we were in college, and we would travel and we would party and be around the other fans, and there'd be trash talk, but it would always be kind of fun because it was the start of the year and there was hope. It wasn't the end of the season if you lost, so you know you had 11 more games to play. There's just something about it that, like, when LSU came to Morgantown, there was just a way different atmosphere than there would be for West Virginia playing Florida State anywhere but Tallahassee and Morgantown. So I moved those down. I understand why they do them, for the TV factor and the money, but those are further down on my list for games that I absolutely want to watch. I just enjoy big-time games on campus, which – even if West Virginia happened to do the Marshall thing this year, there may not even be fans there anyway, so it wouldn't be a big deal.
Well, yeah, and that's again, this was all hinged off a hypothetical of what maybe could happen this year. But yeah, if there's in terms of the fans, there probably wouldn't be fans this year if that was the case, or maybe could be the case. But yeah, and then just thoughts on the Maryland game. Is there a Maryland rivalry?
I hate Maryland.
So you do. So there's a Maryland rivalry.
Yes, I hate Maryland. They were the worst. It was the worst fan experience that I had during my brother's 4 years of playing. Was going to College Park twice, and then we played them in the Gator Bowl, so I was there too. They're the worst fans that I encountered. And you would think Virginia Tech and Pitt because of the hatred.
Yeah, I'm surprised by that. Yeah, I've been down to Maryland a bunch of times.
Maryland was
seems like
no
a beautiful
question my least favorite fan base that West Virginia played against for those 4 years. Maybe it's changed when they joined the Big Ten. The superiority that they held on their shoulders and looked down at every West Virginia fan and just assumed that we were all Jessica White was infuriating. They were awful. So
that's
I
interesting
like beating
to say,
Maryland.
because there are a lot of, I don't know if that was a personal experience, but that is interesting to say, because there's a lot of WVU alums that are around the DMV. And a lot of them around the Maryland area. That is a hotbed for a lot of WVU alums. Basically, a lot of them, if they don't go national, they move to Pittsburgh or the DMV. So there's a lot of them there. So I'd imagine you get a lot of WVU fans to go to the game, and certainly the recent situation. To me, though, I just never felt Maryland was a rival at all. I don't know. They never was a big game that I can think of that mattered for either school. They certainly didn't
were always
have
in a different
connection.
league. So
they're both similar, so I don't
conference.
see how one's bragging over the other in terms of success. They're both similar.
Yeah.
I
think it was. I mean, honestly, I think it was a socioeconomic thing.
Okay, that could be, but that's interesting that's not felt as much with other schools. Maryland was the most.
No, never really much in Pittsburgh.
Fans,
I mean, you would hear stuff in Pittsburgh, but that's to be expected, and it's a rivalry stuff. But the Pittsburgh thing is different, especially, and I speak for this from a personal way. There may be people that live in the Eastern Panhandle that like Maryland because they deal with those people and they work with them, and there's people down, in the Greenbrier area that really like Virginia Tech because they're close to Blacksburg. They're closer to Blacksburg than they are Morgantown, so maybe they like them. I always felt Pitt, it was always more of we would scream and we would yell at each other, and it would look like there would be fights getting ready to break out. However, you could go to a game at Heinz Field on Saturday between West Virginia and Pitt, and you would want to fight that guy. You could go back, you could stay there every night, and you could go to a Steelers game on Sunday, and you would be having beers with that guy, and you'd be high-fiving.
That's true.
So West Virginia not having a professional sports team means that you actually – like I grew up a Pittsburgh Pirate fan, and I'm a diehard Pittsburgh Penguin fan. I don't like the Steelers, so football I'm good hating Pittsburgh. Like that's fine. Like
and now you just follow your
like you don't like us. That's
good.
Baseball,
we're
great. But obviously baseball not now, but growing up forever until my brother played, we were Pirates fans, and we're really big Penguins fans. So there was always kind of that knowledge that it was like these same people that were yelling at and we claim to hate one day a year, the rest of the time we're actually kind of cool with them. Like we actually have a lot in common.
Yeah, and there is the connection of the Pittsburgh sports scene. I mean, Morgantown's in the Pittsburgh media market.
Yes.
I see a lot of WVU, West Virginia media members down at the Steeler press conferences occasionally. So, yeah, you do have that connection that you wouldn't have with the other schools. It's very rare to see a person from Morgantown or really anywhere from West Virginia that's a Baltimore Ravens fan. There were some Redskins fans, but it's not anywhere near as much of a connection as the Steelers. So, yeah, that might be the other end of it. But, yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on that because, to me, Maryland seems like almost this rivalry that's almost forced upon because of somewhat close geographic proximity.
That's why.
There's really no incident or really anything else that I can really point to, and you do have that with Virginia Tech, even though they've never been in the same conference. You do have that with Pitt. You don't have that with Penn State, but at least I could see playing it because it's a big win for you and there's a big reward. That reward wouldn't be there as much with Maryland, and again, Maryland doesn't really bring much to the table in a sense as a rivalry perspective. Well, Randy, I definitely appreciate the time here. So you are on board with playing Marshall, but you have a that I didn't hear as much on Twitter. So now you're more for every few years and away.
Yeah, you don't have to do it every year. I wouldn't mind playing them, and I'm not afraid of them. I'm not afraid of losing to them. Go down, lace them up, beat them, come back to Morgantown, let them play Wichita State or Tulsa or whoever else they have on their schedule, and we'll play Texas and Oklahoma, and we'll move on.
Yeah, and we both know, and it would be funny to see that they would 100% be throwing a banquet together. They'd have a
parade every day for a year.
It would be unbelievable. Maybe that'll get Randy Moss back. That might be the way to get Randy Moss back, is have him flip a coin or something. That might be the only way to get him back to the state. Yeah, that'll be interesting. I definitely appreciate the time, though. We'll maybe do something here as we get towards a college football season that hopefully exists, or what's going on. There is that game that is played in college basketball, even though it's a similar situation. So that, I guess, could be part of the argument. I do kind of get what you're saying. It's unfortunate that people like me have been made this way based on the way college football is.
That's how it works, man.
You have to think about risk reward right now with the system. And I'm still, as much as people worried so much about, that Oklahoma lost, cost WVU a chance to play for the conference title a few years ago, it's still, man, if they didn't lose to Oklahoma State, that was actually a bigger loss that season. Then it wouldn't have ruined that year overall, and even more so making that game almost meaningless with Oklahoma in some respects. It could have been more of that. So you lose those type of games to, say, bottom feeders of the world, which Marshall is, at least in the context. It's a big dagger in your season. But again, Randy Gyorko, who is affectionately known as Goose on the Metro News Sports Line. Let me know if you ever need me to jump on board there. Again, I do a lot with Weekly and occasionally with you guys. So definitely let me know. Say hi to Brad and Tony and all those guys down there. And then can also say hi to Jedd for me. See if he remembers me from years ago. Say hi to Jedd.
I'm sure he will. He's got a pretty good memory. That's a baseball player in him for you. He can tell you. He can recall pitches that guys threw in a 2-1 count in a game 31 in his rookie year. So
okay. So
those guys are a different breed. Trust me.
Yeah. Is he ready? Is he hoping?
He's good to go. He's been working out. He's been fortunate enough to have a spot that's been able to keep him in shape and to be able to do some stuff. Now you don't get any on field stuff, but as far as his body goes and whatnot, he feels good. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about any of the financial stuff or the collective bargaining stuff. One, because I'd rather not know, because then people ask me and then I speak like I'm involved in the Players Association meetings and I know what's going on. And I just prefer to ask him, are you ready to go? What do you think? And he said that I'm ready to play. He wants to play, as far as I know. So that's where I am right now. He's golfing right now.
Okay.
I'll be out there soon. So.
Okay. Well, I don't want to hold you up anymore from that. Definitely. Yeah. I'm glad that I'm sure he wants to play. I'm glad that he's working out and getting ready. And I'll have to maybe ask you sometime what his thoughts are on the Bryce Harper proposal of just going really buck wild in terms of getting a season together.
Some people got to do what you got to do. You got to make that money.
Yeah. And
if I was making $38 million, I'd want to play too.
Well, that's very, very true. And I guess some baseball is better than no baseball, no matter how crazy the proposal may be. But again, Randy Gyorko of the Metro News Sports Line and brother of Major League Baseball player and former Mountaineer great Jedd Gyorko. So, Randy, definitely appreciate the time. And, yeah, again, as much as I can say I want to hate on the game, it would be cool to beat Marshall from now and again. It would be cool to put them in their place, but it's hard to be glass half full. Yeah, when you it's hard to be glass half full though when you know the program so well. So I know they would lose that game occasionally. It would ruin a year, but you convinced me a little bit.
You're a true Mountaineer with that statement.
Yeah, I try to keep it real. For Randy Gyorko and all of us here at Pittsburgh Sports Live and now WV Sports Now, I am Mike Asti. Until we meet again.